If you love hummingbirds as much as I do, this is your video. Our fascination with hummingbirds started 500 years ago when the early explorers came to North America and saw hummingbirds for the very first time. Nobody believed them back in Europe, so they had to start killing them and bringing them back, and they almost put them into extinction. Oh, I'm so glad that didn't happen because they're one of my favorite birds, and I'm sure they're one of yours too. In this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about hummingbirds, like how to attract them to your backyard, how to feed them, and most importantly, when you see them, how to identify which species there are. There's so many hummingbird types in North America. So sit back and relax, and I'll tell you everything I know about hummingbirds. Hummingbirds! Okay, who's ready for hummingbirds? I think I say that every bird. I love hummingbirds, but I also love them all. So, okay, let's get into it. Hummingbirds, there's so many hummingbirds in the world. In fact, there's 363 species of hummingbirds. And guess where they are? They're all in North America, South America, or the Caribbean. There's no such thing as hummingbirds in Europe, Asia, or Africa. So it was quite the shock when Christopher Columbus or the first explorers came over and they saw these tiny little flying birds. In fact, they thought they were hybrids of insects and birds. And they were quite the wonder when they were brought back to Europe. And maybe you've heard the term old world versus new world birds. Well, let me just tell you what that means. It means an old world bird is something that was there on the continent of the Middle East, Africa, Asia, Europe. And when they discovered North America and South America, anything that was discovered from that new world is a new world bird. So because they have no hummingbirds over in Europe, these were all now New World species. It's just something that didn't evolve in Europe, but they are in North and South America. And with that fascination for these new, tiny, beautiful birds, they started using them and killing them for ornamentation on ladies' hats in the late 1800s and to the early 1900s. So much so that birds were threatened to become extinct because of all the feather trade, especially egrets, like those long white egret feathers. They were killed by the tens of thousands and brought over to Europe. And more so for hummingbirds because their feathers are so tiny. And this is where all the beautiful colors came for their hats and scarves or whatever they're using them for. And so it would take a lot of hummingbirds, especially for those brightly colored feathers, to make anything. So I think one report I saw, there was 40,000 hummingbirds killed in 1911 alone. So yeah, horrible. Luckily that trade stopped and hummingbirds are healthy. So let me just show a few things on hummingbirds before I get into the ID. Is this feather pattern where there's bright, sparkly feathers around the neck and head, that's called a gorget. It's spelled with a G, but it's pronounced gorget. And it's an old world term for that neck protector. So the fancy armor that the royalty would wear if they're going into battle, that was called a gorget. So that's the same term used for that beautiful sparkly feathers around the face of a hummingbird. It's the gorget. And also people love to feed hummingbirds, and I encourage you to do the same. There's hummingbirds everywhere in North America and Canada. So all you have to do is put out a feeder. They will find it. And the feeder, it's easy to put up. And it's cheap to fill, right? It's just sugar water. And it's strictly table refined sugar water. So it's a 4-to-1 ratio. So it's 1 part sugar, 4 parts water. Now what I do is I heat up or just use the hottest water that comes out of the tap. You don't need to boil it. I find that using hot water though helps dissolve the sugar. So I get a big mixing or a measuring bowl, and I put in 4 cups water of hot water, and then I put 1 cup of sugar, and then I take a whisk and mix it up, and then I fill up my feeder. And there's a little bit of water left over, I just dump it. Now, people say you can use food coloring to turn it red. I don't, and I recommend you don't as well. The food coloring, those dyes, don't do anything to help the hummingbird find the feeder, but they are shown to cause harm, especially that dye causes, in the hummingbirds they've studied, shorter life expectancy and tumors in the bird. So the hummingbird feeders you can buy have enough red on them to mimic the flowers. So the red top, the red bottom, sometimes there's a red handle. That's all you need. It doesn't need to be red all the way. And the white I find helps because it's clear water. If it starts getting maybe gross and moldy, it starts getting cloudy, and you can see that if the water's clear. If it starts getting cloudy, you know it's time to dump the feeder and clean it out. I usually clean out my hummingbird feeder, depending on the weather. If it's really warm, every 3 to 4 days. And usually it's mostly gone by then anyways. And I'll clean it out with a vinegar solution if it's getting gross, and then refill it and put it back up. So that's easy to attract hummingbirds to your yard. Next, I wanted to tell you about this interesting fact about hummingbirds, is they can go into a state of hummingbird hibernation called torpor. Now it's involuntary. If the hummingbird is getting cold, it will basically fall asleep. Its heart rate goes from, like 105 beats per minute all the way down to 50. And it slows its heart, and it's able to survive if it gets cold. So if you run across a hummingbird that looks like it's passed out, and you can actually pick it up, it will let you pick it up, and it's like it's dazed. Just leave it alone. And when it warms up, sometimes it's the next morning when the sun comes up, it will shake itself, it will raise its heart rate, and then it'll fly off. It's a survival mechanism that some birds, including hummingbirds, go into. Quite interesting. Not many people know about that torpor. All right, let's get into the hummingbird ID. All right. If you're out east, there's really only one hummingbird. It's the ruby-throated. The west has 6 or so varieties: black-chinned, rufous, Allen's, Anna's, calliope, Costas, and buff-bellied. So let's get into these. Ruby-throated. So where I live out east, we only have one type of hummingbird that breeds and lives out east, and that's the ruby-throated. Can you guess how it got its name? Yeah, look at that bright red, ruby red throat on the male. And on the female, it's basically plain, dingy white underneath with green over. Now, it only looks red on the throat if it's in the sunlight. So when it's not in the sunlight, it looks like this, where it's just dark, a dark chin. So that in the sunlight would be bright red. But if it's not dark, it's not bright, it's just dark. So that can be a problem when compared to our next species of hummingbird, which is an out west bird called the black-chinned hummingbird. So if a black-chinned hummingbird flew out east to get into this territory, it would be an ID conundrum. All right, but there are ways to tell them apart. But just telling you here, if you're out east, it's a ruby-throated, occasionally a rufous, occasionally a black-chinned, but if it's nesting in your backyard, it's going to be a ruby-throated. So that's the out east hummingbird. Now going to the west is, I said, this black-chinned. Now luckily its range does not overlap the ruby-throated, but here's the male with a purple chin, and you're like, well, that doesn't look ruby at all. That doesn't look, why would I confuse purple with bright red? Well, like I said, you only see the purple in the sunlight. If it's not in the sun, or it's a dark day, or if it's in the shadows, that's all going to look dark, which means it's going to look very similar to this ruby-throated. All right. But if it's in the sunlight, purple, okay, I know it's a black-chinned hummingbird. And the female, again, similar to the ruby, where it's kind of a dingy white, gray underneath, and a green on the back. Yep. So very common in the West. All right, black-chinned hummingbird. Now we've got the orange hummer. There's two types of orange hummers. The first is the rufous hummingbird. This guy, rufous is a color, right? Rufous is orangey, so it goes by its name. And it breeds in Alaska, and it winters in Mexico. So if you imagine a map, Mexico to Alaska, that's its range, and it goes in between those two areas. And so if you can draw a line on the map in between those spots, and you're in that area, and it's orange, okay, most likely it's a rufous. However, they are known to stray, to get off track, and they've even come as far all the way east to the East Coast. Why, when they're going to Mexico, would they go to New York? Right? They've got something wrong with their GPS, something haywire in their brain, told them to go east instead of south. So out east, if you see an orange hummer, and usually this is in the late fall, it's a rufous. And those are fun to chase. All right. And this is why sometimes folks keep their hummingbird feeder up late into the season, into October, November, long after the ruby-throated has left its territory, in the hopes that a stray rufous hummingbird will come into the area and pick up those feeders. Now, here's the conundrum. There is another orange hummingbird out west called the Allen's hummingbird. And this one lives in Oregon, California, Arizona. They also live in Mexico in the winter, and then they fly up to the west coast to breed in the summertime. Now, they're one of the earliest migrants. So it's in early December they come up from Mexico, before any of the other hummingbirds. This is why it's a good idea, if you live out west, to keep your hummingbird feeders up year-round, because hummingbirds come and go. Some are late, some are early, and you never know when they really need that food, that nourishment on their migration. So keep it up. So this one is different than the rufous because it's got that green in its back. So you saw go back to the rufous there, right? It's orange on the back. It's orange, and it's got a buffy orangish wash here. But the problem is the rufous can also have some green. So the green typically it's an Allen's Q, but it's not reliable. So I'm going to show you in the next slide how to tell them apart, but it's hard. It's really hard. Luckily, Allen's is a much rarer hummingbird. What's neat about them is because they are an early migrant, they're now flying in colder weather. And like I mentioned the torpor earlier, they also have another trick where they use their legs to regulate their heat. If they're cold, they will take their legs and kind of hug it closer to their body to stay warmer. But if they're warm, they will drag their feet and kind of dangle them down to lose some of their body temperature. So that's an interesting fact about the Allen's hummingbird. But look at that fiery orange throat feathers on the male, and not so much there on the female. It's kind of the The way it goes with hummingbirds, the males have the bright colored gorget, where the females don't. So here I said that conundrum with the Allens versus the Rufous. Like I mentioned, the Rufous doesn't have the green feathers on its back where the Allens does, but that's not always the case. So the only way to really tell is to get a photograph of the tail. All right. And the difference is these feathers here, where this arrow is pointed at, the feathers just past the middle. So here's the middle two feathers, the ones just on the sides of the middle. The Rufous looks like they're pinched, right? They're pinched here compared to over here. And it's here's a photo of the actual feathers here. See, those are pinched, all right? Whereas an Allen's isn't, which doesn't help unless you get a photograph of the tail, which is really the only true way to know if you're looking at an Allen's or a Rufous. So if you only got a brief glimpse and it was an orange hummingbird, an eBird, you have to call it a Allen's / Rufous. That's an option, right? As you're going through your checklist, because if you don't see the tail, you can't tell them apart. So the way I remember this is orange is Rufous. If you're picking an orange fruit, if you're twisting and pinching the orange to get it off the tree, just like you pinch and twist the tail of a Rufous to know that it's a Rufous hummingbird. So if there's a pinched tip, you pinch the orange, it's a Rufous. If you didn't pinch and twist, it's an Allen's. It's the other orange one. All right. Good luck. And now you might say, how in the world am I going to get a photograph of a hummingbird's tail? Well, if it's perched, which means it's sitting in a tree, they do a lot of preening, which means they lift up a wing and then they use their bill and their head to scratch and look, and they're constantly preening and fanning out that tail. So it might sound impossible, but if it's perched and you're nearby with a camera, there's a decent chance that it'll fan its tail out and you can get a photograph of the tail. But it's a lesson in patience. Good luck with this one. All right, on to Anna's hummingbird. This is a gorgeous hummingbird of the West Coast, all along the extreme coast, Oregon, Washington, California. You'll see the Anna's up in British Columbia as well. It's got that gorget, that bright fuchsia pink head and neck. And these guys, they'll do an amazing display dive bomb where it will go up 130 feet straight up in the air. The male will. It'll go zoom way up high, and then it'll dive bomb straight back down to the female right in front of her. And that sound of its tail as it stops right in front of her, it sounds, it's like a crack. And it'll do that, and it'll position itself with the sun. So as soon as it stops, makes that sound, and its face is bright pink, right in her face. It's quite a shocking to see. And sometimes if you're lucky in the garden, and it will do the same display to you, to a human, not to a female. So that's a special occurrence if that ever happens to you. And it's the only one that looks like this out west. So pretty easy to identify. Anna's hummingbird. Next is the calliope hummingbird. I see a lot of different pronunciations of this one, calliope, but no, it's calliope. It's the smallest of the hummingbirds, right? It's also out west, but it's not on the west coast. It's not on the right on the extreme coast with the water. It's more in the higher elevations in the mountains, and they like the high meadows. The females look similar, but to the Annas, but look at the, it's more of a fuchsia throat, and it's not a full head and throat and back. It's just that under the bill area. The females have a peach wash to their chest. You can see there, and it's such a smaller hummingbird than the other ones. So tiny and way up high. It's the calliope. And down to our last two, we've got the Costa's hummingbird, which is in the southwest U.S. So we're thinking Arizona, little parts of California, New Mexico. So in the southwest, it's purple, but it's got that giant purple beard and looks like a mustache. Like it's way too big, right? Its gorge is taking over its entire face and neck area. No paint splatter there. You need a serviette to wipe your face there, Mr. Costa's. It's got a green vest. When we say a bird has a vest, it means one side of the chest and the other, leaving the middle open, like you're wearing a tuxedo vest here, and your white undershirt is showing, or your white dress shirt is showing there. So green vest there on the males, and the females have a white eye stripe. White eye stripe there, which is a little faint, but you can see it better when it looks like it's dipping its head there in a dish to drink. That white eye stripe there. So this is the Costa's hummingbird, purple with the overgrown beard and mustache. And the last one for the U.S. is a buff-bellied hummingbird. Now this one's a strange one. You don't see it very often. It's a Mexican hummingbird. But after it breeds in Mexico, it has this tendency to go up through Texas and hang out either in Texas or Louisiana. So you'll see those reports every late summer and fall, sometimes into the winter. They're a reverse migrant, which means they fly north after breeding instead of south. And they've got a pretty thick bill there, and what's unique about them is it's a bright red bill with a black tip. So the males and the females are similar, but the males are way more brighter on the throat, that gorget, than the females. Everyone loves hummingbirds. Go get a feeder. Put it up this week. I want to hear your stories. All right. Best of luck. Thanks for watching. I am so jealous of all you West Coasters with all your hummingbird species. See, I live out east. We've got the ruby-throated hummingbird. I think it's time for a birding adventure. I think it's time to go out west. I remember the first time I went to Arizona, my jaw dropped with all your species. If you want to follow my adventures, hit the subscribe button. And until next time, I'll be always birding.